Slides, huh?
So, welcome everybody. First of all, we want to thank Professor Cutolo for his availability to give this webinar in these difficult times. As you know, Professor Cutolo is full professor of rheumatology at the University of Genoa. He is chairman board classrooms of the Euler School of Rheumatology and former president of the Euler, the European League Against Rheumatism. And his basic and clinical research include basic mechanisms of DMRs, rheumatoid arthritis, systemic sclerosis, nail fold video capillaroscopy in rheumatic diseases, and many others. As you know, the webinar will be recorded and published on the ERN ReconNet's YouTube channel and on the ERN ReconNet's website. For any questions, if you have any questions, you could use the questions and answers at the bottom of the screen, or if you have any difficult, you can use the chat, and we will read the questions and to Professor Cutolo. After the webinar, if anyone wish to participate in the survey, could click in the bit.ly link that you could see, or wait for the page that should open automatically at the end of the webinar. And as usual, we invite you to follow us and to contact us by the email, or visit our website, or follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find many other webinars of Professor Cutolo and other professors of the ERN ReconNet. So now, please, Professor Cutolo, you are welcome to start this webinar.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you to the participants. And as mentioned, this is a presentation that is related to a topic that is growing as interest, because we will see how many data are coming and discussing the real role of the gender. The most recent survey, no matter of the country, the latitude or the social level, no matter, indicates that the proportion of death in men is much higher, at least close to the ratio 2:1 everywhere. So there is a reason that is not on the social problem, but it's something more, a biological problem. And this is from the Global Health 50/50 organization tracking the sex ratio of the COVID infection from the beginning in February. And you see also the confirmed cases of death by sex. In any case, the cases are over 50% or around 50% male, and this is important. But what is important is that the death in male is absolutely associated with the number of cases. So, in few words, the severity of the COVID infection and progression up, unfortunately, to the death, it's much more common, at least the double in men. Why? Well, to understand, we have to go back a little about the role of sex hormones in chronic autoimmune diseases. In chronic autoimmune diseases, we have a starter that usually may be an infection, maybe an trauma or metabolic causes. You have the acute inflammation that's frequently solved. But if the stimuli continues, the infection, or the other stimuli continuous. And inside the subject, the complex neuroendocrine immune response that include the gender do not heal. We move to the chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation means recruitment of cells, recruitment of messengers, recruitment of tissues. And inside the tissues, after the acute injury or infection, like the COVID infection, several cells are activated, produce mediators like cytokines. And if not solved, if we don't have a resolution, we move to the chronic inflammation, chronic injury, or chronic infection, of course, with all the consequences. So gender is an important player, and we will see why. And even if the chronic inflammation may solve with some invalidity or insufficiency, part of the reaction of the body, the immune system reaction of the body against the stimuli, is characterized by a strong immune response that we will see it's articulated. And gender is an important key role and play an important key role in regulating the intensity of the immune response. So gonads, adrenal glands modulate the immune system, and receptors for all kinds of steroids are evident on the cells of the immune system. And this is because all steroid hormones, including sex hormones, have the same structure from cholesterol, so they share the receptors, they share the transition to the nuclei and the interaction with the genes, including with the hormone. This is a very important point, because we will see the androgen estrogens are important players in conditions like infections, vaccination, autoimmunity, with testosterone, the most important androgen in men, and estradiol, 70-beta estradiol, the most important estrogen in female. Estrogens are strong enhancer of immune response. All the cells involved, from the antigen-presenting cells and macrophages and T and B cells, have functional receptors for estrogens, type alpha and beta, and are modulated by estrogens. But the most important part of the immune response we will discuss to try to understand this behavior in COVID infection is related to the role estrogens play enhancing the maturation and the activity of the B cells, and the related, of course, production of antibodies. So estrogens are important, but what about testosterone? Why testosterone is not so important regulator? There are receptors for androgens on immune cells, but the role is completely different. For example, recently it was shown that the strong growth factor for the B cell, the BAF, B cell activating factor, it's absolutely downregulated by the estrogen, the androgens. So in presence of androgens, the possibility for B cell to be activated and following the same way that follows in females with estrogen is impossible. In experimental studies, as well in humans, low level of testosterone means that there is downregulation of BAF. And in a hypogonadal, the concentration of BAF increase. So even in presence of low levels of testosterone in old age, even worse the situation. Not possible to start a good production of antibodies. And here, the epidemiological consequence of the possibility for female to produce much more antibodies, to produce by B cells antibodies. And so we see the ratio that we have between male and female in B cells disease like lupus, scleroderma, thyroid, and so on. Other diseases where both cells are activated, including the T cells, and other conditions where prevalence of T cells, inflammatory cells, are produced. So in other words, in presence of estrogens, the possibility to produce antibodies, so in autoimmune disease, against the infection, And we will see in vaccination, it's much higher and efficient in female. But in autoimmunity, this is a damage, of course. So when the virus COVID-19 arrives, unfortunately, there is no discrimination between male and female patient or possible patients. The interaction between the virus at the beginning is similar. If we look at a very recent report from the Italian Institute of Health, we see that over any age class, the ratio is almost similar. We have about 50% of men and 50% of females. So this is important because it means that the true action of the immune system is not yet regulated, influenced by the estrogens. It's just the first contact. But now we know that even when the virus meets the men and women, already from the beginning starts a differentiation. When the virus enters the airways and goes in the lung, meets something that is the immune system naive against such virus. And the ratio, as I mentioned, is 1-to-1, no discrimination. The epidemiology tells us that we have 1 and 1, but this is the really beginning. Already at this time, gender hormone, gonadal hormones play a role. The virus, to enter their airway cells, need receptors, at least one receptor, angiotensin-converting enzyme, and a protease that induce the proteolytic cleavage of the spike protein and make possible this interaction and the infection and the membrane function, and the virus enter with its RNA. But here, already there are some difference between men and women. For example, androgens may favor the transcription of transmembrane protease, serinase 2, that clive the clivation of the protein, spike protein, and make possible activate the spike protein. Only this protein is capable. On the other side, in female, estrogens are strong downregulator of the angiotensin-converting enzyme. In few words, in presence of high concentration of estrogen, it's much more difficult for the virus to find such receptor. And so the virus has some problem. Estrogens decrease the treatment of the cells in vitro, decrease the expression messenger of angiotensin-converting enzyme. So the interaction between the virus and receptors is important for the virus replication, but high concentration estrogens make difficult this interaction. That is not true for the protease. This is the first impact. As the virus penetrates about almost all the organs and tissues may be affected. We know very well the lung, but also the liver, the kidney, the intestine. Even one of the earliest signals is diarrhea. The brain, a lot of problems. The eyes, the nose, the heart, the blood vessel with some new signalation of important thrombophlebilia, and even muscle and joint are involved. So in few words, the virus may be hosted everywhere. So the difference between male and female is something that is biological. It's not a matter of smoke or other activity. It's something very strong. Because after the interaction between the virus and the cells, the innate immune reaction starts. And sex hormones here already play a role. So if at the beginning, the ratio is almost 1-to-1, here something changed. The inflammation move inside the lung, and the innate immunity tried to block, making also a lot of side effects, of course, to block the replication within a strong inflammatory reaction that should eliminate the virus, including the production of interferon gamma by T cells. And this innate immunity involves a lot of cells, from macrophage to neutrophils. But unfortunately, in some cases, this storm hurricane is so strong that maybe himself this storm cause of damage. In any case, start a chronic inflammatory reaction. And every cell of the innate immunity also prepare the second step of the immune response, that is the production of antibodies against the virus. And here is the crucial point, as I mentioned, the start of the adaptive immunity. Innate immunity is almost similar, almost, not totally, but almost similar. But adaptive immunity, that should represent the resolution of the infection, the downregulation of progression of inflammation, the survival. Here, estrogens enhance the B cells, reduce the viral life, increase the antiviral immunity by production of neutralize antibodies and suppression of hyperinflammation. But this is true in female, where the estrogens are able to interact with B cells, produce antibodies, even in older age. In men, it's impossible. This is the second step. So the second part of the immune response that include the production of antibodies is lacking or is not efficient. So instead of revolution, the disease is much easier to continue in men. And here we have the severe disease, phase 3, the severe disease, and the progression of the disease is much easier. So the role of estrogens is really important in this crucial part. Female are much able and easier for them to block the inflammation by producing antibodies, male not. And this is true and very important, because if innate immunity is the first barrier, question of hours, days, non-specific, with production of large number of cytokines, including interferon gamma, we know that this activity of estrogen may continue also in the menopause, when the estrogens are produced in periphery, and more inflammation had more estrogens you produce, because the cytokines activate the aromatase. So estrogens are present at any time of the life in female. And so the immune system and the B cells can produce antibodies at any time. We will see with vaccination in elderly. So the adaptive immunity, it's much, much more efficient in females, and estrogens protect women and make easier the resolution of the inflammation induced by the virus, against the virus. So, in few words, female react much better to the antigens, including the COVID-19. And this is very interesting paper, show that the IgG antibodies concentration that are efficient for the virus blockade are much higher than in men. And so it testifies that the B cells works in female, less in men. And even the concentration tended to be higher in women than men. Even men do antibodies, but less in percentage and in quantity. So the strong production of IgG antibodies is strong in female because B cells are supported by estrogens and can block or try to solve the disease. And here we have the problem. We have the pneumonia and the risk for the life, especially in men, ratio 2:1, severe involvement of the body. This is an important position because all the studies have shown that this ratio is evident everywhere at any latitude, as I mentioned. So in men, increase the severity of the inflammatory reaction, progress, and double the risk of death. Here again, you have some data of April 29 in Italy, and you show there, you see the percentage of lethality according to age groups, still almost always similar at least 2 to 1 at any age class. And this is very important because the ratio male-female that I showed to you still really important. If you look at the last report, May 26, you see the number of deaths for male and female according to the age, and you see even more in older age, over 90. Men are much more affected. It's no question of social life. It's a question of the immune system to be incapable to manage earlier and to block earlier the disease progress, and of course, severe disease means death in several cases. We have several reports. From the first early Chinese report last year, that is reported here in an Australian ratio, more recent, of course, you see the different possibility to die between men and female at different age. But what about vaccination? Because vaccination is very important for us as an example, and also to think about in the near future when we will have vaccine. Who to vaccinate earlier, men or women? In this experiment, mice were treated with influenza virus, and you see in the red column, the production antibodies was much higher and earlier. See the days post-vaccination, much higher and earlier in female mice. And the concentration of estrogens on your left, more estradiol you have, more neutralized antibody they produce. The opposite for testosterone, less testosterone concentration and less antibodies, higher concentration of testosterone and lower antibodies. So there is a negative correlation between the concentration of testosterone, that means less antibodies, and positive concentration with concentration of estrogens and antibodies. This is a very important point because when we do the vaccination, the seroconversion is present at adult age, but also in elderly, for the reason we discussed, still the production of estrogens in old women. So all the studies have shown that vaccination means more antibodies, a stronger reaction in female. What happened in natural infection, in COVID infection? Stronger production of antibodies because B cells are upregulated by estrogens, and longer time of reaction. The opposite in men, and this is what we observe with the vaccination. And men with the highest concentration of testosterone have a lower reply to the stimuli of vaccination and tend to have the lowest neutralizing antibodies titers. And here we go back to the early information that estrogens are potent stimulator of the immune response, estrogens. And female get classical diseases related to the high stimulation of the immune system, autoimmune mediated disease, antibody mediated disease, like lupus. In lupus, you can have 200 antibodies against any kind of antigen. It's exactly the mirror of the situation that here is damaging in infection. Vaccination is helping. So you see here the sex ratio, men, women, regarding the cases of lupus patient at a different age. And you see how impressive is the well-known ratio, 9 to 1, 9 female, 1 man. This is important. But the question is, people with autoimmune disease are protected against, because if they have a very efficient autoimmune system activated by the disease, should they have a less COVID infection or not? Here we have several data from the Global Rheumatology Alliance and others I will show you. And practically, there is no difference between the population not affected by autoimmune disease. Patient with autoimmune disease get the infection, and you have 17 different casuistics percent of lupus, 38% of rheumatoid arthritis patient. So apparently, to be affected by an autoimmune disease do not protect against the infection of coronavirus. The Euler COVID database, these are the last data a few days ago, 26th of May. You see there is, of course, a larger number of female because the rheumatic autoimmune disease, we have just said, that are more frequent in female. And this, so it's a characteristic, but if we look at some details, we see that the age is between the fertile age or after menopause, so again, it's possible. And again, we see that rheumatoid arthritis, COVID in rheumatoid arthritis patient is around 38%, so like similar to alliance. But we have also some lupus, psoriatic arthritis, and so on. Regarding treatments, not so strong influence by the immunosuppressive drug in favoring the infection. There are no data present. So we should conclude. We start with the earliest epidemiological data showing that men are much more prone to develop the disease over the time, to move to the chronic disease, to move to the very severe disease. And if it's true that at the beginning, when the virus for the first time meets the population, there is no discrimination between men and female, just something is known about receptors by protein. When start a real immune response, here the role of sex hormones become more and more and more evident. And estrogens are natural, as a natural enhancer of the immune response, they start to push against the virus with a different systems, increasing interferon gamma, but especially increasing the production of neutralize antibodies. And so the women are more protected and the resolution is easier and faster. Exactly the opposite in men, unfortunately, and the result is what we have described. So the severity increase, the progression is much easier, and the severity means also higher risk of death, even double. I think this should be considered the final message that, of course, take care also some social factor and lifestyle, but the real biological significance that makes similar at any kind in any population the same behavior is this one. I thank you and ready for your question. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much to Professor Couto for this really complete and interesting lesson. I don't want to call it just a webinar. This is a very powerful lesson on the sex hormones and COVID. So are there any questions from the participants? So a question related to the vaccination, planning a vaccination and thinking to a limited number of vaccines at the beginning based to this gender bias, who are most urgent people to be treated in advance?
This is a very intriguing question. Of course, we spontaneously we should say men, old men, for the reason we have just finished to mention. The immune system should react well with the vaccine, we hope. Of course, we saw also that in some severe cases, the use of immunoglobulins, plasma, directly plasma or immunoglobulins works very well. But in any case, the vaccine should be first served to the older individuals. Why? Because they have other conditions and comorbidities that may increase the problems, the clinical problems related to the infection. And imagine diabetes, hypertension, hemophilia. If you can protect, especially even women, of course, that will react for sure better, you can reduce the risk that the overlap between the different comorbidities accelerate, catalyzed by the infection, by the virus, become a very serious condition. And so young people have problems. We saw some pregnant girl with a storm cytokine storm that died because too strong immune system, too efficient immune system, too much estrogens. But excluding some cases, young people react much better. The percentage of people that they solve the disease, stay at home in quarantine, is much higher than older people. We know what happened in the recovery for other people. They died. And so I would suggest that your question, if you have a limited number of vaccine, first to the elderly people, maybe earlier male, and then female, in order to prevent the overlap of comorbidities effects.
Thank you so much. If there are no other questions, I think we could once again thank you to Professor Couture and to all participants, and we suggest you to subscribe to our channels, to our YouTube channel, to our Twitter profile, in order to be up to date to all our initiatives and to all our next webinars. And thank you again, Professor Couture.
Thank you to all of you. Bye. Good luck. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy.